and welcome to Surf Sports TV and the Masterclass series, where we attempt to unpack and talk through some of the major, issues that are impacting our sport and surf sports in general at the moment. The series is hoping to help young athletes learn a little bit and learn from the knowledge of some industry experts and how to overcome the risks of some of these issues that are facing athletes as they grow and develop through our sport. Each episode brings together a panel of experts to pass on their knowledge, recent research, and a couple of tips and tricks they have with regard to every different issue that we bring up. Today, it's performance preparation. And on the panel today, Queensland Academy of Sport physical performance coach Tim Mosey, of course, former Ironwoman Series champion Harriet Brown, and Nick Marshall from Surf Life Physio and the Australian team medical advisor. Guys, thank you for coming on board here. Performance preparation, I guess, it's a very broad term. We'll start with you, Nick. What does that mean in terms of surf sports and how athletes get ready to race?
Oh, look, I guess in terms of my role with the Australian team, it's about ticking all those little boxes. So trying to identify any sort of gaps that there might be in somebody's support network where they live or just in their general health, and then trying to do something about that prior to us actually leaving Australia so that everything's in place when we get wherever we're going.
Tim, what about from you? From a QAS level, you cover many sports. Performance prep, I guess it means different things to different people.
Yeah, it does, Josh, particularly from a support network, which I'm involved in. So I've got various arms for preparation. My area is the physical performance side of preparation. I'll work quite closely with head coaches, physiotherapists, dietitians, nutritionists, medical staff, obviously the head coach, and we take an all-encompassing approach, almost a holistic approach to preparation, trying to tick, not so much tick the boxes, but go in all the aspects of an overall approach to performance. Yeah.
And Harriet, what about for you from, I guess, the personal level and the athlete who has to actually put their foot on the line and get the job done? Obviously preparation's important, but what's performance preparation for you?
Performance preparation, well, a lot of it comes down to the athlete individually in surf lifesaving. We obviously have our coaches and our club management. So I'm at Northcliffe and I've got Floody there as a coach, and so she really looks after us from an athlete training performance point of view. But for a lot of the rest of it, it's kind of up to us going to the physio, making sure that we're healthy, making sure that we're eating the right food, making sure that we're well warmed up, and a lot of that comes down to on the line and on the race day. So we have a lot of support behind us, but it's also, compared to, say, the QAS, where a lot of that is covered, a lot of that is up to us as well.
I was going to say we might cover this at each differing level. When you go into a Kellogg's round or a Coolangatta Gold or World Championships, what sort of things do you undertake in the week leading up to ensure that your preparation's perfect?
Well, I try and make sure that I sleep really well. I think sleep is a really big one. Try and make sure that I eat well. I try and eat well all the time, but especially leading into a big competition. Mindset is another one, and that's probably something I've only kind of realised later on in my sporting career, that that's really important to be in a good mind frame for racing, whether that's positive, whether that's focused. For me, it's more about relaxing a little bit more and not overthinking things. So what do I do? Sleep, food, mindset, training. I really trust Floody. That one's great because a lot of it's up to her, but we discuss my taper. Sometimes I may need to hold back a little bit more. Sometimes I feel like I need to train a little bit more. So that depends on how I'm feeling, and I listen to my body. I've learned a lot over the years and what works well to me. So I kind of improvise and plan it well, but adapt as I go through.
And I guess that's at clubland level, and Northcliffe being the most professional, or one of the most professional clubs there. It's a pretty good setup. Nick, to then the Australian team, you'd expect that level of professionalism to go up a little bit more. What considerations do you take in when they go to a World Championships or a Sanyo Cup in Japan?
Well, one of the biggest things, and it would be the same for Tim as well, is when we actually get together as a team, it can be the first time we've ever met these athletes. So what we're trying to put in place is not just a performance health model, but just a general health model. A lot of the athletes come from smaller clubs, not necessarily always bigger clubs, and we're trying to get it so that these athletes take whatever information they get in the Australian team back to their clubs and sort of disseminate that information. So we certainly have a full medical history that we get done prior to travel. We actually have a bit of a focus now on heart health as well, so we do a heart test. But probably most importantly, we get a pre-admission hospital form printed out. One thing that came very apparent to us in travelling internationally, and the Australian team generally goes away twice a year, is that time zones are different, the language is not always English, and so we can rock up at a hospital with an injured athlete and have to wait hours till we can get medical help because we don't actually know the athlete's medical history or what they're allergic to. So all athletes now in an Australian team have to fill in a pre-admission form so that wherever we are in the world we can present to a hospital and medical or surgical intervention is not delayed because we don't know their sort of medical history.
And I guess that's great advice with the World Championships, obviously Adelaide this time round, but it'll head to Italy and then more than likely around the world. And for those athletes travelling to New Zealand and other countries like that, it's pretty good advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably the other message to take home is that all surf clubs travel. And so we're hoping that sort of a top-down approach is that all sort of team managers will take this approach. You know, we don't have a national database for health in Australia, so you can't just arrive at a hospital and expect your notes to be there. So if every surf club was to do this for all team managers, then wherever they are in the country, they've got their athletes or their team sort of medical history. So it doesn't really matter if you're travelling internationally or not. You've certainly got everyone in your team sort of history.
And Tim, you're looking at a number of sports and the top level of those sports. What other practices do you see that could be added on top of that possibly there's rowers or rugby players or whatever are doing that maybe surf lifesavers aren't?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. If I'd maybe touch on the international travel, I think one of the areas that we try and focus on is minimising the impact that A, travel's going to have, but B, being outside of your normal environment. Little examples like taking your own pillow so that you've got some level of home comfort when you're sleeping. Trying to minimise your jet lag with various methods and trying to get into a routine as quickly as possible that you're used to potentially at home so that you're minimising the potential negative impacts that may happen on your performance. In terms of the other sports that we work with, say rowing, for example, particularly international travel with aligning, obviously Northern Hemisphere summer is with our winter, so teams or crews or squads will have extended preparation periods from sort of now up until maybe June, July when they'll travel for the international World Cup tours. So it's trying to peak them and prepare them for, say, Australian championships and then selection trials. Another big block of training and then into their international competition. Similarly to surf, I understand a lot of training's geared towards Coolangatta Gold, with then another kind of big training block into after Christmas and into the Aussies, which is in April. So you've kind of got those two almost peaks that you have in a season. Similarly with, say, our rowing as an example. We've got peaking into our national competitions and selection trials, which you need to perform well in or you don't get selected. And then obviously working again for another peak into the international competition. So yeah, there's some similarities certainly with the sports that I in particular work with to surf. Yep.
And I guess to further expand that, how much, and Harriet spoke about it as well, is the communication between head coach, performance manager, and whether that at a club level is your team manager or whether it's at the Australian team, someone like Nick. How do you see that communication evolving as you travel into bigger and bigger events and as the season goes on?
It's a good point. Sometimes minimising the number of people within a line of communication can actually help keeping everything on track. So head coach on top of things, and then being able to filter communication through to physio if they need to, through to sports docs if they need to, through to physical performance if they need to. That certainly shifts in balance when teams travel. Often we'll take a smaller number of support staff with the teams that travel away. So physio may go, physical performance generally not, doctor generally not, dietitian generally not, masseuse generally not. So all of a sudden information at home being spread between 5 or 6 different support staff go away, go down to 1 or 2 different support staff. So then you've got the challenge of communicating from Australia through to international areas. So the challenge certainly is to maintain that. Obviously, if support staff aren't there overseas, then you've got to find ways of, I guess, going about keeping the quality of what you're doing without the support staff that you've left behind. So, yeah, certainly challenging.
And Nick, we'll take that down into clubland and something you know very well. We go away to an Australian titles and it might be head coach, team manager, chef, nutritionist, masseuse, mum and dad, and they're all the same person. So that makes things sometimes easier, sometimes a little bit more difficult in terms of getting all those things right and one person managing those 5 or 6 different roles.
Oh, absolutely. And that's probably the difficult part of surf, isn't it? And you said mums and dads generally are the person that are your chef, they can be your masseuse, they're everyone. And from an Australian team perspective, we understand that. We generally will try and travel with a physio, and we're trying to expand that network. But similar to what Tim said, we're trying to replicate the home environment, and so trying to put all those little things in place. But at a surf club level, very, very difficult to have all those things at your disposals. We do like to have with an Australian team member an athlete management system and apps through the phone, and that's just a way of someone like myself can monitor what's going on. But we do rely heavily on mum and dad paying for things and paying for services local to where they live.
And I guess we'll start to talk about things that really affect your performance and the way you can mitigate those things. Harriet, what do you see as the biggest impacts on your performance, given that we go away to basically every carnival is a different beach, a different environment, different conditions. There's no 2 days that are ever exactly the same in surf life saving, regardless of what it is. What do you do to mitigate those risks to performance and best manage them?
Well, I think a lot of the things that we do, we just realise that after so much practice of travel, you just start to do them. But we don't really think about it too much. But I know a few years ago I went to Worlds, and leading into it, I was eating really quite healthy, quite clean. And then we got over to France and we were going out for dinner every night, having cheese, having rich foods. And I felt so ill for a few days and I couldn't figure it out why. And I think I realised I was probably picking the wrong choices out at dinner and not having the things that I would usually have at home. And it's just those little things that you start to realise and you've got to be on top of. So having similar food. So often when we travel away for Ocean 6 races as a team, we might go out for dinner or we might have a later dinner, and changing the times of when we're eating, going to bed late, waking up, doing a different warm-up if it might be colder in Victoria. It's just all those little differences that sometimes it's okay, and I think sometimes what is probably more detrimental is when you stress about not being able to do something. So if you have a late night and you're like, this is not normal, I can't deal with this, or I can't warm up because it's too cold, that's almost more detrimental than not having it right. But in saying that, trying to keep everything as close to what you do at home as possible, and then if something out of the ordinary happens, your flight's delayed, something else happens, then it's almost trying to control your mental state, accepting that it's okay and moving on, and then trying to achieve your best after that. So there's a lot to it. My advice is probably just to plan it and then try and stick to your plan as best you can.
Nick, I guess that fluidity to the process, everyone talks about creating a process, sticking to it. If there's just some things you can't do in your process, how do you overcome those as an athlete or as somebody helping an athlete?
Yeah, look, that's a really difficult one, and Tim would obviously have strategies on this as well, because you plan for everything, and then invariably something will come up that'll change that plan. I could sort of echo Harriet's point. You just have to be sort of adaptable and willing to sort of face whatever comes at you. From my perspective, with the medical stuff, it's all about sleep. I mean, I think a lot of people harp on a lot of different things, but I think sleep's the most important. People will spend hours waiting for a massage from the masseuse or the physio, racing around to get a protein drink and all that stuff, and that's fantastic, but sleep's the big thing, and that's probably the thing in our team that we really try and focus down on. But exactly like Harriet said, we've just got to be adaptable to whatever sort of situation arises.
And Tim, I guess from your point of view?
Yeah, adaptability is certainly at the high point of how we communicate to our athletes. It's an interesting one. We have varying levels of experience in the athletes that we work with across all the sports, and you tend to find that older athletes garner more experiences of things that go wrong on international trips, so they get used to it more, and down the track it doesn't affect them as much. So it's certainly something that, particularly for younger athletes, will be quite prescriptive in terms of explaining to them how we'd like them to go about their travel for these reasons. Whereas we move into the older athletes and they've had the experience before, so we work with them a little bit more to sort of see what's worked in the past for them, see what potentially they didn't like. In terms of what we're trying to focus on, similar to what Nick said, sleep's number one. A lot of research coming out at the moment, particularly through the AIS, talking about the number one basic recovery methodology is maximising your sleep and your quality of your sleep and how to do that. So our communication is certainly geared around how we can do that, particularly in international travel, but also in their day-to-day training environment, how that's going to give them the best outcome, and at home as well.
I guess we may have covered it, but just to wrap things up, maybe one piece of advice you'd give to budding young athletes or all the people watching at home as what your key to performance preparation and being at your peak when you put your foot on the line for that big event has?
Make a plan, tick off all those boxes: training, taper, sleep, food, any injuries and things like that. So make a plan, try and stick to it as best that you can, but also just try and stay happy and enjoying what you're doing, because I think that often when you're happier, you race at your best.
It's good advice. Nick, what about from you?
Oh, I'd almost echo that exactly. It's routine. Get into a routine. The way you train is the way you race. If you can set up a really good routine early, then exactly we're trying to replicate that when we come to race, and nothing will be a surprise, hopefully.
Perfect.
I think a routine's really important. What I'd suggest, maybe in addition to that, is being well planned, but understanding that things are going to go wrong, and it's potentially how you manage your stress and your responses to the things that go wrong that's going to shorten the, I guess, negative impact or reduce the impact on your performance. So understanding your individual response to situations that are out of your control, and trying to minimise your response to stress levels. Yeah.
So don't sweat the small stuff.
Don't sweat the small stuff.
That's good advice. Well, that wraps up this edition of Surf Sports TV and performance preparation. Tim, Nick, Harriet, thank you so much for coming down here, and we'll see you guys next time.